Hey everyone, and welcome to this video on Pluto in the 8th house. If you have Pluto in your natal chart in the 8th house, then this video is for you. I'm Cassandra the Saffron Sage, helping you use astrology to evolve, and let's talk about Pluto in the 8th. First, we're going to talk about Pluto, then we'll talk about the 8th house, the nature of the 8th house, and then we will talk about what it means when you have the planet of transformation in the sign of transformation. Hint, hint, it's an extreme one. So let's get into it. We're going to start with Pluto here. So the mythology of Pluto starts with Persephone. So the story goes, Pluto kidnapped Persephone, took her to the underworld, where she became queen of the underworld. But the thing is that her mom didn't want her there. So her mom, Ceres, or Demeter, depending on which myth you're following, was upset and tried to get her daughter out of the underworld, understandably. Ceres was the nurturer. You know, she would nurture the crops and the fields and make everything grow. So what happened was Pluto gave Persephone back, but not before he got her to eat some pomegranate seeds. And by getting her to eat those pomegranate seeds, he was able to keep her down in the underworld for X amount of time per seed. And so as a result, he let her go, but she had to come back. And so now Persephone goes with her mom 6 months and with Pluto 6 months. And during the time she's with her mother, that's when we have spring, because Ceres is happy. She's able to nurture the fields and take care of the crops. And when Persephone is down in the underworld, that's when we have winter. So that's basically the overall story of Persephone. Some people say that Pluto kidnapped her. Others say she went willingly. But the idea here is that the hell, the underworld where Pluto lives, is a metaphor in this story for the subconscious mind. And so Persephone becoming queen of the underworld isn't just a story of a girl being kidnapped. It's a story of a maiden, becoming a crone, a maiden, a immature person, right? An immature woman becoming a grown woman, becoming a queen, right? And ruling the underworld. And really, Pluto, the planet, is all about power. So by understanding and mastering our subconscious mind, we can all become queen of our own underworld. Some people have more things to master than others, I would say, but still. So other things to know about Pluto are Pluto is known as the god of wealth because diamonds and jewels come from underground. It's Pluto in Roman mythology, Hades in Greek mythology, and Pluto actually was like a combination of Hades, but also Pluton, aka Dispater. So Pluton, aka Dispater, was said to have power over the underworld and mineral wealth. And then, the underworld being the resting place for departed souls. Pluto's family tree here, Pluto's dad was Saturn, brother was Jupiter and Poseidon, sisters were Ceres, Vesta, and Juno, which means Persephone was his niece, so it gets kind of cringy there. But basically, other parts of this story I didn't know, and this is from mythopedia.com, and that is that Pluto was lonely, so Cupid shot a dart at him, because he didn't want him to be lonely down there in the underworld, doing his work, watching all the departed souls. So that is the super quick version of the Pluto and Persephone myth. Pluto, in terms of its meaning in astrology, represents transformation. Wherever we have Pluto in our chart is going to be the area of life that is going to rule us, have power over us until we learn how to have power over it. It's an area of life where we have the potential for greatest transformation. Now, that can go either way, right? So if someone has Pluto in their 8th house of wealth, of not even of wealth, but of other people's money, well, you have the most potential to transform in that area. So Pluto in the 8th, because that's what this video is on, is going to be, have a lot of potential for money. There's a lot of earning power, and we'll talk more about that later in the video. Other things to know about Pluto as a planet, it's a generational planet. So it stays in a sign for 14 to 30 years. So the sign where you have Pluto is not personal, right? The outer planets are not personal because they stay in a sign for so long that they become generational. Everyone in that generation has that placement. But by house. This is where we get into the good stuff with Pluto, because this will tell you how you moved through a past life, aka what you're used to, what your energetic comfort zone is. And every Pluto has a polarity point. The polarity point for Pluto is the opposite point in the chart. And that is sort of like the energy to master, to release that any kind of past life challenges of that Pluto. Usually it's like where we have the greatest potential to transform. It is also not easy. Like, it's not easy for us. These are our soul lessons. So they're challenging, or they can take us our whole lives to figure out. But it really, the polarity point is how we transform and transcend those limits of the past. So now let's talk about the nature of the 8th house. The 8th house is a sextile house, which means it follows an angular house. The 8th house follows the 7th house. The sextile houses are the 2nd, 5th, 8th, and 11th. This is a complex house, okay? I'm not going to lie. The 8th house is complicated. It deals with entanglements. It deals with transformation. It has some kind of challenging connotations associated with it. And part of that is, if you're looking from a traditional astrology perspective, it doesn't aspect the ascendant, so it doesn't support life according to ancient astrology. The 8th house, I always call it the house of sex, death, and other people's money, because those are the major things that fall under this house. And the reason why it has that connotation of other people's money is if you use something called derivative houses. The 8th house is the 2nd house from the 7th. And so the 2nd from anything represents the money of that thing. So your 1st house is you, your 2nd house is your money. Your 7th house is your partners and other people in your life. The 8th house is other people's money, and so on. So it's how we merge resources with other people, our intimate bonds, and topics that just fall under the 8th house are things like trust, mediumship, debt, inheritance, assets you bring to a marriage or that you don't bring to a marriage, psychology, the study of psychology, working in the field of psychology, or an innate ability to understand psychology. And that's partly because, like, the 8th house is how we merge with others, right? So when you have challenging planets in the 8th, like Mars or even Saturn, or I would say Pluto in the 8th house, this actually represents an ability to handle other people's negative psychological stuff. Now, this doesn't mean you have to, but oftentimes people with 8th house placements, usually because of their own unique experiences in life, are better able to help other people. So oftentimes people with negative planets in the 8th, it's like Mars in the 8th, people will call you when someone dies. They'll want your help when they're dealing with the most challenging parts of life, because you have this unique ability to understand or have compassion or not get scared of those topics. So people with stacked 8 houses can also be the most rich people sometimes, because the ability to be wealthy oftentimes requires you to handle larger amounts of debt, right? Like when you're talking about big business, this involves taking out big loans, right? And getting securing resources from other people on an epic level. So if you have an epic 8th house, sometimes that's how that can be expressed. Now that depends on, the planets there and stuff. So now that we know some of the major meanings of the 8th house, let's talk about what it means when Pluto, the planet of transformation, lands in that 8th house of transformation. It's a very, very strong place to have Pluto, because especially if you have Pluto in Scorpio, because in modern astrology, the 8th house is ruled by Scorpio. So if you have Pluto in Scorpio in the 8th house, it's like having Pluto in Scorpio times 2, or having Pluto in the 8th house times 2. Having Pluto in the 8th house is quite a transformational and powerful placement to have. So let's get into the details about why. Number 1, again, you're naturally able to handle other people's psychological challenges. Now, again, you could use this for your work or not, but it is a really, really good placement for a therapist because of that ability to just help people in that way. Now, oftentimes Pluto in the 8th is associated with increased intuition, heightened psychic ability. The 8th house is the house of psychic ability. It's the house of especially things like mediumship, things that involve like boundaries not being there. You know, I think most other spiritual stuff is going to go in the 12th, but 8th house is like the ability to bust through people's boundaries, almost like you can tell when someone's lying. You have these powerful powers of perception. You just know things, you can sense things. And, you know, that can go from whether someone's lying to, you know, whether someone, for some reason, you know, this is a very sexual placement. So we're going to talk about sex a lot today, guys. But you could probably tell with Pluto in the 8th, like, if someone's attracted to you, you probably have a stronger radar for that. You may have stronger attractions to people sexually, or you may have challenges in this area because, you know, Pluto here can make it a little bit more complex, whereas sexuality, it just isn't like an easy flow. You can also be obsessed, especially with like self-analysis, the deeper meaning of life, these kind of things. Pluto in the 8th wants to know why. Wants to know the root cause for everything, wants to know the deeper original source of something. So you can feel like you're born asking why. You could question things most people just accept as how they are. You could just find yourself curious, but like not satisfied with superficial answers and on a quest to find your own, or especially too with like why people do the things they do, why you feel the way you feel. So it's like anything related to self-analysis, deeper meaning, all that kind of stuff. Another thing about this placement is you can be a very, very extreme person. You can be all or nothing. You can be ride or die. You can love or hate things. You can be loved or hated. And you're probably going to hate things that are fake because you see through them so easily that it's like, are you kidding me? You're actually going to lie to me about that? Come on. Like, it's just going to be so annoying to you. From an evolutionary perspective, if you have Pluto in the 8th house, you are learning how to overcome all limitations. So naturally, this means that you will be challenged if you don't do this. And what I mean is, in your lifetime, you may find periods of stagnation followed by periods of transformation. Stagnation, transformation. And you might find that you just cannot stay in a situation that like inhibits your growth, you know, where things get stagnant, they get stale. It's like your soul is going to feel that instant need, maybe not instant, but this deeper need for change. And this in itself creates a bit of a internal tension because your soul relates to the need to always be changing. But as humans, we also have a need for security and stability. So automatically, these two aspects of self are going to be at odds with each other. The fact that you're learning to overcome all limitations means that naturally you're going to come up against them. So if you think about your life as a Pluto 8th house person, you may think about how you could probably characterize your life as a process of change, a process of having this limit. It's like you can't just say, oh, you know, I see this limit in myself, but I'm just going to let it be. It's almost like this Pluto won't let you do that. And there's almost like Pluto will come along and take that thing away or remove that limitation, even if it's something you liked or wanted or were comfortable with. I'm not saying that you're being punished for this, but that this is sort of the experience of an 8th house Pluto person. Power versus powerlessness are very, 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 very strong life themes for Pluto in the 8th house. So you may have power struggles with people. You may have had situations in life where you felt powerless. And, you know, the idea, just like the Persephone myth, is about being able to understand why and then move beyond that, you know, rise above that limitation. So with this Pluto, there's almost this natural inability to accept limits. You know, it's like I said, you can't just say, oh yeah, I see that I'm not good at that and I'm just going to let it be. Or I see that I have this challenge in relationships and I'm not going to do anything about that. It's like you don't have that option in this life. Now, you may feel like that your personality doesn't accept limits. And that can also be how you relate to others as well. Unable to understand the stagnation of other people. That is another trait of this placement. And that is where some of the real challenges of this placement come in because other people aren't like Pluto 8th house people. So when you're encountering people who choose to stay in a certain situation, this may be right for them. But to you, as a Pluto 8th house person, it's going to seem wrong when people settle for things, when people don't keep growing or keep expanding or aren't willing to see why they're doing the things they're doing. But it's good to remember for the 8th house Pluto that not everyone is here to do that. That is your lesson. That is your sort of part of your purpose, not necessarily theirs. And you can't transcend other people's limits for them. You can try, but it doesn't usually work. It actually is problematic because sometimes people have those psychological limits in place for a reason. 8th house Pluto people can find themselves merging with forces more powerful than they are, right? The planet of power in the sign of merging with others. In the house of merging with others. So things like the occult, things like magic, things like possibly powerful people, but usually it's going to be a symbol that you connect with and sort of absorb the power of that symbol. So this can be meditation, it can be yoga, it can be, for some people it's sex. For some people with this placement, sex becomes like a vehicle to expand your own inner limits. Okay, so the difference here between Pluto 9th and Pluto 8th is that 9th house is all about the higher learning and like knowing the metaphysical laws and all the reasons, like all the written laws and rules and like procedures to follow, whereas the 8th house, none of that stuff matters. What you're supposed to do doesn't matter. It's more about like meditating on a candle flame or, doing things that in the moment help you transcend the limits of this reality, whatever that is for you. It's less about learning the rules, and it's more about doing something that brings you into a new experience. We do see that 8th house being called the house of death and rebirth. And that's why transformation is often referred to as death and rebirth, because sometimes before you are reborn, you will go through something that makes you feel like you are dying. And so we can think of all the ways that transformation shows up in all of our lives and how much that feels like a death and rebirth. So someone with Pluto in the 8th house could feel like they are a phoenix who has risen from the ashes. They could feel like they've been in situations where their back has been put against the wall many, many times. But with Pluto in the 8th, you have the ability to bounce back from those things. And I'm not saying that it's good or it's easy, but there's almost a need to go through more intense experiences because there's something about those experiences that are regenerating for you. Sometimes 8th house Pluto can have a death wish or a subconscious death wish. So like expanding the limits of something like, let's say, doing drugs to the point where it's dangerous. I'm not saying everyone watching this will have that, but this is one way this can express, and that can show up as like a fascination with death or being obsessed with serial killers or wanting to understand the psychology of serial killers or anything like that. Sometimes the topic of death will just show up in the person's life in terms of like someone who works with that field. Mediumship also, again, a topic that works with the dead in a different kind of way, right? The fascination with death can show up in several different ways. Now, the reason this death wish is here is because your soul desires power, okay? The soul of the Pluto 8th house person wants to feel like it has power. And so again, that's why there's these experiences of power and powerlessness. And again, that death wish is one way this can show up. So sometimes people with this placement, if they feel stuck, it's almost like there's some kind of energetic explosion that will happen to rattle you out of your stuckness. There's another thing about the Pluto 8th house where you can sort of naturally draw in people you can help. And herein there lies a little bit of a challenge because sometimes this can create an imbalance and a potential to manipulate because that Pluto in the 8th house, it kind of does give you a little bit of power over other people. So there's a need here, you guys, to use your powers for good. Sometimes 8th house Pluto people can find a weak link in an argument. You just have this ability to go right to the piece of the thing the person said that was BS or that wouldn't hold up and just tear it down. Now, keep in mind that this desire to do this is sort of a desire to be powerful, right? And it's actually a reflection of a deep fear that what you know has a weak link. So if you find yourself constantly doing this with Pluto in the 8th house, constantly needing to, tell people where their weak link is in their argument, or correct them, or like bust through their belief bubble or things like this, just know that this is an actual fear of yours that you're almost psychologically protecting yourself from. And the fear is, it's like, if I attacked your argument, then you can't attack mine, right? If I attack you first, you can't attack me. And oftentimes this will not be something you are aware of unless you really do the inner work to kind of peel back the layers and see it. There is an ability with this placement to use your perception to help other people peel back the layers of who they are and why they do the things they do. It really is only help if the person wants it, right? Because someone who doesn't want to see why they're doing the things they do, you peeling back the layers and showing them is really not nice. How people use this power can range from, doing black magic to helping someone build a business. The way that you use that power to help people, understand the deeper reason why they do the things they do can be used for anything. So, that's up to you with how you choose to use your powers. Another thing about this placement is you will not believe what you are told. You will not believe anything anyone tells you unless you can prove it or experience it. There's a need for this placement to see, feel, touch, taste, hear, have an experience. I mean, the 8th house is a house of expanding through experience. And sometimes those experiences are comfortable, sometimes they're really challenging. So one of the challenges for people with Pluto in the 8th is that most relationships that we have in our lives are not always changing, right? Most relationships will get to a lull, or a stagnant point. And for the Pluto 8th house person, this is actually quite a challenge because it's like they feel that it's not moving forward, it's not changing. Sometimes an 8th house Pluto person will end a relationship because it's not doing anything. It's staying the same. And the challenge here, though, is that most relationships hit that point. Therefore, how do you keep changing and keep on your quest of always transforming while other people are not transforming at the same pace? So this can be a challenging thing where sometimes the Pluto 8th house person will kind of have a need to cycle through relationships, whether it be romantic or otherwise. And then there's also some feelings of being used that sort of are naturally built into this because the 8th house Pluto person is going to sort of want to leave as soon as the relationship doesn't change anymore. Feeling used, trust issues, being used, using other people. These are all themes for the 8th house Pluto that can show up at some point in life or another. This is because they have past life memories of being used by people and having that rug pulled out from under them. So it's like from an early age, sometimes there's things that happen in early life that sort of resonate with that same energy. Needless to say, Pluto 8th house people, trust issues are a thing. Sometimes there's a need for revenge with people with this placement. And most people with this placement, they're going to have a couple different reactions in relationships. One is they're going to just want to move on as soon as the relationship doesn't have that change factor, or that energy doesn't seem to be moving. Two, they can actually hang on forever and never want to change. It's almost like the opposite reaction happens. But there's a third way, and the third way is that the Pluto 8th house person finds a way to be in a relationship with someone who is also changing, and lets you change too. So in order to make that thing real, it's about learning when the feeling like you want to leave or you want to fantasize about someone else or whatever is actually a need to change, and when it is just more of a knee-jerk reaction. So there really takes a lot of inner work on the part of the Pluto 8th house person to know when to keep relationships and when not to, because you could have it go both ways, where you have this desire to have a new lover just because, you think you know everything about them. Trying to keep this PG here so I don't get demonetized. Or, you could do the opposite, where it's like you hold on tight to the end to something that should have been, could have been released long ago, but it's, I don't know, there's this fear of using people, this fear of getting your own needs met and leaving, that also can come from that past life, those past lives of being used, where now you don't want to use anyone ever, even when you are supposed, even when it would be totally appropriate to move on. And again, this comes from those past lives where you were too invested, right? Because the eighth house is how we merge with other people. Pluto is a very, very intense planet. So it's like getting all in with someone. It's like when you merge with someone, you merge all the way. You mesh souls all the way. So with the polarity point in the second house, the way to work with this placement, what you're learning in this lifetime, is how to meet your own needs. Now, this does not mean you cannot have relationships, but that it's about learning the energy of self-reliance, learning when to rely on yourself and when to open up to others, and how much to entangle with people. Most people with Pluto in the eighth house will have a moment or many moments in life where they are forced to either simplify or figure out what they want or who they are without other people. There is usually a time in life where, and I'm not saying the whole life, where it's about figuring out who you are without other people, untangling any entanglements that you've had up until that point. And it's like then once you get untangled, once you figure out who you are, what your values are, what your wants and needs are, then you're in a more of a clear space to figure out who to entangle with again. So it's about figuring out what your resources are, what skills you bring to the table, who you are without other people, and then also learning the values of who to merge with and who not to, in order to not just reach your own goals, but be the person you want to be. That second eighth house axis is about values. It's about what's mine versus what's yours, right? That's the really simplified version of this axis. And so when you have to learn that lesson of what's mine, well, that means you're going to have experiences where there's an imbalance of what's yours, right? What's somebody else's, where you're using too much of somebody else's something, or they're using too much of yours, or, these entanglements aren't even or aren't equal. And you have to sort of learn how to untangle them again so that you can figure out what really is mine, what am I bringing to the table, what do I need, and how can I create that in my life and in my relationships. If you transmute and shift and work with the highest energy of this Pluto, you can become this amazing self-motivated force that can encourage the growth of other people in a way that doesn't control them or possess them, and help people release conditioning like nobody else. You can identify the root cause of what drives yourself, your motives, other people's motives, and problems to better the world in some way. This is an amazingly powerful placement if you can get past some of the original entanglements that are sort of built into it. This Pluto in the eighth has intensity, power, transformation, and can be used as a gift toward others if you learn when to mesh with other people and when not to. So I hope this video helped you guys. You can comment below, let me know if it resonated. And I also am doing a past life course. So if you want to learn past lives with me, we're going to talk mostly about the South Node, but we'll also bring in Pluto. So there's a wait list. Get on the wait list if you want to join this so that you'll be the first to know when it comes out. And I am limiting the spaces for this one, so make sure you get on that wait list if you want to be notified when we open it up for everyone. So that's what I have for this Pluto video. Make sure you leave me a comment and let me know how it resonated. I love hearing from you guys, and your comments are what help me grow so much. So thank you so much to everyone who's been commenting, liking, sharing, all the things, and I will see you guys in the next video.